"If you carry me up the stairs, I'll tell you a secret," said the sick little girl. The mechanic had no idea what was coming. The cold breath of an autumn afternoon drifted between the tall buildings, the sun low and pale as it brushed the tops of glass towers. In front of an upscale apartment complex, Isaac Cole walked with an easy stride, his jacket still smelling faintly of motor oil. He had just finished delivering a repaired sedan to a customer in the building and was heading back toward the main street. A small sound broke the quiet, a thin, raspy cough. Isaac turned his head and saw her. A little girl sat hunched on the bottom step of the stone staircase, clutching a worn brown teddy bear to her chest. Her dark curls were tangled around her face, her skin pale against the deep pink of her sweater, each breath labored. There was a faint hospital band still circling her tiny wrist, the kind he remembered from his own sister's long stays years ago. He slowed, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. "Hey, you okay, kiddo?" His voice was gentle but steady. The girl lifted her gaze, eyes wide and bright despite the fatigue clouding them. "I'm just really tired. Mommy's upstairs, but I can't—" Her voice broke into a cough before she could finish, her small shoulders trembling with the effort. She took a shallow breath, the kind that seemed to take all her strength, and leaned slightly toward him. "If you carry me up the stairs," she whispered, her voice scratchy, "I'll tell you a secret." Isaac hesitated only a heartbeat before sliding one arm under her legs and the other behind her back. She was so light it startled him, like lifting a bundle of hollow bones. As he carried her, he noticed the pale blue sticker on her teddy bear, marked with a hospital logo and the words "Pediatric Oncology." The quiet realization struck him. This little girl was fighting something much bigger than her size. Halfway to the landing, she rested her cheek against his shoulder, her voice barely more than a breath. "My mom is lonely. Can you take care of her when I'm gone?" He froze for half a second, the words landing heavier than anything he had heard in years. But when he looked down, her eyes were closed, a faint, tired smile on her lips. He kept walking. At the top floor, he shifted her weight gently in his arms as the door before them opened. A young woman with golden hair stood framed in the doorway, a thin blouse hanging loose over tailored slacks. Her expression froze when she saw her daughter in the arms of a stranger. "What's going on? Who are you?" Her tone was sharp, but the concern underneath was unmistakable. "She was sitting downstairs," Isaac replied evenly. "She asked me to bring her up." The woman, Diane, stepped forward quickly, taking the girl into her arms and pressing her hand to the child's forehead. "Thank you," she said, though her voice still held a guarded edge. Before the door could close, the little girl stirred, looking at her mother. "Mommy, this is Isaac. He's nice." Diane blinked but said nothing more. Isaac turned toward the stairwell, the door clicking shut behind him. As he descended, the sight of that hospital band and the words she had whispered stayed with him, deep and unshakable. The morning air carried the crispness of early autumn, the kind that hinted at colder days ahead. Diane Hartley stepped out of the apartment building's lobby, holding Lila's hand, the little girl's steps slow but steady as they made their way toward the front drive. A car was due any moment to take them to the hospital for another round of tests. As they stepped into the courtyard, Lila's head suddenly lifted, her dark curls bouncing as she spotted someone near the curb. "Isaac!" she called out, her small voice bright with recognition. Diane's brows lifted in surprise. She followed her daughter's gaze to see the man from the day before, crouched beside the hood of a dark SUV, tools spread neatly on a cloth. He looked up at the sound of his name, and a faint smile touched his face. "Morning," he said, standing and brushing his hands on a rag. "I'm just helping one of your neighbors. Small world, I guess." Diane nodded politely, her expression composed, though she could feel Lila tugging at her hand. "I did not realize you worked around here," she said, her voice even. "Just passing through," Isaac replied. "I take jobs wherever I am needed." Before Diane could guide her daughter toward the waiting car, Lila slipped her small hand from her mother's and took hold of Isaac's instead, her fingers curling trustingly around his. She leaned closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I haven't told you the whole secret yet." Isaac glanced down at her, one brow lifting slightly. "No?" From a step away, Diane caught the movement of their heads together. "What secret?" she asked, tilting her head at her daughter. Lila only smiled, the kind of small, knowing smile that children wear when they feel they have something important to guard. "It's just for Isaac," she said softly, turning back to him. Diane opened her mouth to insist, but the arrival of their ride cut her off. The driver stepped out to hold the door, and Diane gave Lila a gentle nudge forward. "Come on, sweetheart. We are going to be late." They all moved toward the car. Diane paused to sign the transport form, the clipboard balanced against the driver's arm. Isaac, without hesitation, lifted Lila into his arms so she would not have to step up into the vehicle. Her small hands held onto the front of his jacket, and she leaned in to speak in that same confidential tone. "Mommy works too much," Lila whispered. "Even when she is home, she is always on the phone or her computer. She does not laugh very much. I think she is lonely, even if she says she is fine." Isaac looked at her, the seriousness in her eyes far older than her 4 years. "That is a big thing to notice," he said quietly. "I just want her to be happy," Lila murmured, then rested her head briefly on his shoulder. Diane returned the clipboard to the driver and turned to see Isaac still holding her daughter, his posture careful, protective. She took a step closer, holding out her arms. "I can take her now." But before he let go, Isaac reached into the breast pocket of his work jacket and pulled out a small, glossy sticker in the shape of a red heart. He pressed it lightly to the back of Lila's hand. "For brave girls only," he said. Lila's face lit up, and she looked down at the sticker as if it were made of gold. "Thank you," she said softly, curling her fingers to keep it safe. Isaac set her gently into the car seat, making sure the belt was snug before stepping back. Diane watched him for a moment, her lips parting as if to speak, but then she only said, "Thank you for helping her yesterday. And today." "Any time," Isaac replied, his voice steady. He gave Lila a small wave as the driver closed the door. As the car pulled away, Diane glanced back once through the window. Isaac was already turning toward the SUV he had been working on, the morning sun glinting faintly on the tools in his hand. Lila sat quietly beside her, one small hand pressed over the sticker on her skin, as if she were holding on to something far more important than paper and glue. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, and Diane began to notice that Isaac seemed to cross her path more often. It was never in a way that felt forced, just small glimpses here and there. She would step into the hallway and see him replacing a flickering light bulb above the elevator, his tall frame balanced easily on the step stool. Another time, she caught sight of him carrying 2 heavy grocery bags for Mrs. Wetmore, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down, patiently waiting for her to shuffle ahead so he could match her slow pace. It was hard to ignore the quiet efficiency with which he moved, the way he spoke little but seemed to observe everything. One Tuesday afternoon, Diane's phone buzzed with an urgent call from her office. A high-profile client had pushed up an important meeting, and she would need to be on a video call within the hour. The problem was, Lila had a follow-up appointment at the hospital that same time. Before she could begin rearranging everything in a flurry of stress, she found Isaac standing in the lobby, chatting briefly with the building's doorman. "If you need," he offered, "I can take her to the hospital. I know the way. I'll make sure she's back safe." Diane hesitated. "I cannot just—" "Only if you are comfortable," he said, cutting off her objection with calm assurance. "She knows me. I will text you when we get there." Lila, already clutching her teddy bear, looked up at her mother with a hopeful expression. "Please, Mommy?" Against her instincts, Diane agreed. 2 hours later, after her meeting ended, Diane hurried to the hospital. As she passed through the glass doors of the pediatric wing, she caught sight of them before they saw her. Isaac sat in one of the brightly colored chairs, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Lila sat across from him, eyes wide and sparkling, despite the bandage on her arm. He was in the middle of telling her something. Diane could not hear the words, but she could see the way Lila's laughter spilled out in soft bursts, her shoulders shaking, the tension in her small body momentarily gone. Diane stood there for a moment longer than she intended, watching the scene through the pane of glass. It was the first time in weeks she had seen her daughter smile like that, without forcing it. Later that week, Diane returned home from the office to find a small cardboard box resting neatly just inside her apartment door. Inside was a basic toolkit: screwdriver, wrench, pliers, all neatly arranged with a folded piece of paper on top, in case something breaks. She stood there, holding the note for a long moment, unsure what to make of it. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried a certain thoughtfulness she had not expected. When she saw Isaac in the hallway the next day, she thanked him briefly. He only smiled, as though it were nothing at all. Diane still kept her distance. Old habits of caution died hard, but she noticed that her gaze no longer carried the same sharp edge when it met his. And when Lila waved at him from across the lobby, Diane found she did not feel the need to pull her daughter away quite so quickly. The rain fell in relentless sheets that night, hammering against the tall windows of Diane's apartment. Wind howled down the narrow streets, carrying the smell of wet pavement and the faint metallic tang of the city after a storm. Inside, Diane was pacing the living room, her laptop still open on the coffee table, when a small, sharp sound made her turn. From the couch, Lila let out a weak whimper. Her cheeks were flushed, her tiny chest rising and falling too fast. Diane rushed to her side, pressing a hand to her forehead, and felt the alarming heat beneath her palm. "Lila? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl stirred, but did not answer, her breaths coming shallow and ragged. Panic surged through Diane. She grabbed her phone and dialed emergency services. The operator's voice was calm, but when Diane gave the address, the reply was grim. Several streets were flooded from the storm, and traffic was at a standstill. It could be 40 minutes before an ambulance could reach them. 40 minutes was too long. Without thinking, she scrolled to Isaac's number. Her fingers trembled as she typed, "She's burning up. Can't breathe right. No ambulance yet. Please help." The reply came almost instantly, "On my way." 7 minutes later, a sharp knock rattled the door. Isaac stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his jacket soaked through. "Let's go," he said, already stepping inside. He lifted Lila into his arms, wrapping her in a blanket Diane had grabbed from the couch, and they hurried down the stairwell. His truck was parked illegally by the curb, engine running, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. Diane climbed into the passenger seat while Isaac gently settled Lila in the back, securing her with one hand while the other shielded her head from the rain. The drive was tense and silent, except for the roar of water under the tires. Isaac's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the slick road ahead. But once he reached a clear stretch, he pressed harder on the gas. Within minutes, they were pulling under the bright overhang of the hospital's emergency entrance. Inside, nurses whisked Lila away almost as soon as Diane stepped through the doors. Diane followed until she was stopped outside a curtained room, left with nothing to do but wait. She sank into a stiff chair in the waiting area, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. A moment later, Isaac sat down beside her. He did not speak, did not try to fill the air with empty reassurances. Instead, he simply rested a warm, steady hand on her shoulder. She felt the weight of it, the grounding presence, and only then realized she was shivering. Without a word, he shrugged off his own damp jacket and draped it over her. The minutes crawled by, measured only by the distant sounds of footsteps and the murmur of voices behind closed doors. Diane kept her eyes on the tiled floor, but her mind replayed every moment of the evening in sharp detail. The way Lila's breathing had rattled, the heat in her skin, the helplessness that had closed in around her like a fist. Finally, a nurse appeared, her expression calm. "She's stable now. The fever is down and her breathing is improving. You can see her in a few minutes." Diane's shoulders sagged, the tension spilling out of her in one long exhale. She turned to Isaac, her voice low but steady. "Thank you. For coming so fast. For being here." His eyes softened, though his reply was simple. "You do not need to thank me." But as they sat there in the dimly lit waiting room, the storm still raging beyond the glass doors, Diane knew she would remember this night, not just for the fear it had held, but for the quiet, unshakable way he had been there when she needed someone most. The morning was clear and cool, sunlight spilling over the rows of cars parked outside the small garage. Diane pulled up at the curb, a cardboard box on the passenger seat beside her. Inside were still warm pastries from a bakery downtown and 2 tall cups of coffee. She had told herself it was a simple gesture, a thank you for the night Isaac had driven through the storm, but she knew it was more than that. When she stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and metal. Isaac was under the hood of a pickup, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a streak of grease across one forearm. He looked up, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes, before he wiped his hands on a rag. "Morning," she said, holding out the box. "I thought you might need a break." He gave a small smile, accepting it with a nod. "You did not have to do this." "Maybe not," she replied, "but I wanted to." While he carried the box toward the small office at the back of the garage, Diane followed. The door was open, and she caught sight of a few personal things scattered among the ledgers and invoices. A coffee mug with a chipped rim, an old brass clock, and, on the wall, a framed photograph. It showed a younger Isaac in military fatigues, kneeling beside a girl of about 8 or 9. She had dark curls, a gap-toothed smile, and eyes that seemed to shine even through the glass of the frame. Diane stopped, her gaze lingering on the photo. "She looks a little like Lila," she said softly. Isaac paused with a cup of coffee in his hand, following her eyes. The silence stretched for a moment before he spoke. "That's my sister Emily." His voice was quieter than usual, almost reverent. "She died when she was 10. Leukemia." Diane turned toward him, unsure what to say. "I was stationed overseas when she got worse," he went on, setting the coffee down without drinking it. "By the time they told me how bad it was, I couldn't get back in time. I missed the last week. My parents said she kept asking for me. I never—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "I never forgave myself for that." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy and still. Diane understood in that moment why he had been so quick to step in for Lila, why he carried her without hesitation, why he stayed by their side in that hospital waiting room. When she threw away her own cigarette, giving in smoking a raw 26-year-old version of the waves, he came for. She took a breath. "You have been doing all this for us because of her." Isaac shook his head. "Not because of her. For her. She would have wanted me to help someone like Lila." He crossed the room, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small, well-worn book. The cover was faded, the spine taped in places, but the gold lettering of the title still caught the light. The Little Prince. "This was Emily's favorite," he said, holding it out. "I kept it all these years. Figured maybe Lila could use a few stories to make the nights easier." Diane took the book carefully, feeling the softness of its worn edges, the history pressed into each page. "Are you sure?" "I am," he said simply. That evening, when Diane read to Lila from the book, the little girl listened with her head resting on her mother's arm, smiling at the simple drawings and whimsical lines. When the chapter ended, she hugged the book to her chest. "I like this one," she murmured. "It feels Warm. Diane smoothed her hair, her eyes drawn to the heart-shaped sticker still faintly clinging to the back of her daughter's hand, and thought of the man who had given them both something they had not realized they needed. The rain had passed, leaving the streets glistening as if the whole city had been scrubbed clean. The air was cold enough to bite, carrying the faint smell of wet concrete. Diane sat stiffly in the pediatric oncologist's office, the hum of the fluorescent lights above pressing in on her ears. Her hands were locked together in her lap, her knuckles pale, as Dr. Patel slid a thick folder across the desk toward her. The folder was heavy with lab results and progress notes, pages printed with graphs, red flag numbers, and long streams of medical terminology. But when the doctor finally spoke, his words stripped away all the formal distance. "The latest results show a rapid progression," he said gently, his voice carrying the weight of experience and sympathy. "Lila's counts have dropped significantly. We need to proceed with a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. Without it—" His voice faded, not because he had nothing more to say, but because the silence could tell the truth more clearly than words. Diane's throat felt tight, as though she had swallowed a stone. "What are her chances?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "If we find a compatible donor quickly," he said, "they are good, but time is critical." Her ears rang, the world around her blurring. By the time she stepped out of the hospital into the night air, the sun had long vanished, and the glow of city lights smeared across her vision through the tears she had not let fall inside. She walked to her car as though through water, her body moving on habit alone. That night, long after she had tucked Lila into bed, Diane lay staring at the ceiling. The soft whir of the heating system filled the room, but it couldn't drown out the racing thoughts. Every worst-case scenario came to life behind her eyes, hospital corridors stretching endlessly, a bed that stayed too still, the quiet weight of a room with no child's voice in it. She turned over again and again, but sleep refused her. When she did drift off, she woke in a panic, heart pounding, unsure if she had been dreaming or falling. The next few days unfolded in a haze. She moved through work meetings without hearing the words, packed lunch boxes without tasting the food, sat beside Lila at the hospital while her mind spiraled elsewhere. She read bedtime stories without remembering the endings. What she did not know was that while she was fraying at the edges, Isaac was making his own quiet push against the clock. After closing the garage each night, he stayed in the small, cramped office at the back. The hum of an old desktop computer kept him company as he searched through bone marrow donor registries. He sent emails to contacts he had not spoken to in years, nurses who had been there during his sister's treatment, coordinators at veterans hospitals, even strangers on online forums for transplant support. He left voicemails, filled out forms, and kept a growing list of possible matches, chasing every thread no matter how thin. When Diane asked how he was, he always gave the same answer, just keeping busy, without telling her what that really meant. One late afternoon, Lila was waiting in the apartment lobby, her legs dangling from a chair, while Diane spoke with the concierge. Isaac walked in, spotted her, and crossed the tiled floor. He crouched so they were face to face. "Hey, brave girl," he said, giving her a small smile. She smiled back faintly, clutching her teddy bear to her chest. "I heard Mommy talking to the doctor. She thinks I did not hear, but I did." Isaac's expression shifted. "What did you hear?" "That I need a new part," she said slowly, "from somebody else's blood." Her forehead wrinkled, but her voice was steady. "It sounds scary, but I think I can be brave." She hesitated, then added in a whisper, "If you take care of Mommy, I will not be scared." The words hit Isaac like a physical blow. He searched her face, and what he saw there was not fear, it was resolve, far too grown up for a 4-year-old. He laid his hand gently over hers. "You just focus on getting better. Let me worry about the rest." Lila gave one small, solemn nod, as if sealing a pact. Then she leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder. Isaac held her there, his arms wrapping around her slight frame, silently making a promise he knew he would keep. She would not face this fight alone. Neither would her mother. The call came just after dawn, when the sky outside Diane's window was still the color of slate. She had been dozing in the chair beside Lila's bed at the hospital, the beeping of the monitors her only measure of time. "Miss Hartley?" The nurse's voice was warm, almost buoyant. "We found a match." For a moment Diane could not speak. The words felt fragile, like a candle flame that might go out if she breathed too hard. "A match?" she finally managed. "Yes, the donor wishes to remain anonymous, but the compatibility is excellent. We can schedule the transplant immediately." Within hours, preparations began. Diane signed stacks of forms, met with surgeons and anesthesiologists, and sat through briefings she barely absorbed. Her mind kept circling back to that one fact. Someone, somewhere, had chosen to give a part of themselves to save her daughter's life. The day of the surgery, Lila clutched her teddy bear as they wheeled her toward the operating room. Diane kissed her forehead, whispering promises she prayed she would be able to keep. The double doors closed, and Diane was left standing in the hallway, her heart pounding against her ribs. The procedure stretched into hours. She walked the length of the waiting area, over and over, pausing only when the surgeon appeared, his expression calm. The transplant went well. She'll be in recovery for the next day or two, but the signs are good. Relief left her dizzy. She wanted to thank the donor, to look them in the eye, but no information was available. Anonymous, they'd said. Diane accepted it, but the mystery lodged itself in her thoughts. That night she noticed something strange. Isaac did not show up. He had been at the hospital nearly every day for weeks, bringing Lila snacks, reading her stories, making her laugh. But now, when she needed to share this news, he was nowhere to be found. The next day, still no word. The third day, she called his number, but it went straight to voicemail. Worry settled in her stomach, heavy and insistent. On the fourth day, she decided to find him. She drove to the garage, the one she had visited before, with coffee and pastries. It was quieter than usual, the smell of oil and gasoline muted. She found him in the back office, sitting at the small desk with his left arm in a sling. "What happened?" she asked, stepping inside. He looked up, startled, then he gave a faint, almost sheepish smile. "I guess they told you about the donor." Realization hit her like a jolt. It was you. He shrugged slightly. "I promised Lila I'd do whatever I could." Diane stared at him, the truth settling over her. You went through the surgery, and you didn't tell me?" "It was not about me," he said simply. "It was about her. About giving her a chance." Her throat tightened, and for a moment she could only stand there, seeing him in a new light, not just as the man who had carried her daughter up the stairs, or the man who had driven through the storm, but as someone who had quietly risked his own health without expectation of thanks. When Lila woke 2 days later, the first thing she did was reach for her mother's hand. Her cheeks still held a hint of pallor, but her eyes were brighter than they had been in months. "Hey, sweetheart," Diane whispered, leaning close. Lila squeezed her fingers weakly, then smiled. "See? Now you have both of us." Diane blinked, her vision blurring. "Both of us?" "Bea and Isaac," Lila murmured, her voice sleepy but certain. Diane kissed her forehead, holding onto her daughter's hand as if she might never let go. For the first time in weeks, the fear that had been wrapped around her heart began to loosen. Somewhere deep down she knew that what Lila had said was true, not just in the way the little girl meant it, but in a way that went beyond words. Isaac had kept his promise, and somehow, without her realizing it, he had become part of their family. The apartment was alive with the soft hum of conversation and bursts of laughter. Colorful balloons bobbed in the air, and the scent of vanilla frosting mingled with the faint sweetness of fresh flowers arranged along the dining table. It had been exactly 1 month since the transplant, and Lila's cheeks had regained their 5th birthday, a milestone Diane had once feared she might never see. Isaac arrived just as guests were settling in, holding a small, neatly wrapped box. He hesitated in the doorway until Lila spotted him. "Isaac," she squealed, hurrying over in a pink dress dotted with tiny stars. She wrapped her arms around his waist before pulling him toward the center of the room. When they reached Deanne, Lila beamed up at her. "This is the man I told you about, Mommy," she announced for everyone to hear. "The one who can take care of you." The room went quiet for half a beat, and Diane felt the warmth rush to her face. She glanced at Isaac, expecting him to look embarrassed, but his eyes held only calm steadiness. Slowly she knelt to Lila's level and brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, I know." She rose and met Isaac's gaze, her voice softer now, meant for him alone. "Thank you, not just for saving her life, but for giving her hope. For giving me hope. You opened a door I thought was locked forever." He started to speak, but the birthday candles were being lit, and Lila was already bouncing on her toes in anticipation. Friends and family gathered around the cake, singing in cheerful voices while the candles flickered in the dimmed light. As the song ended, Diane leaned toward him, her shoulder brushing his. "You already are part of our family," she whispered, her words almost lost in the rustle of applause after Lila blew out the candles. The rest of the evening was a blur of clinking glasses, shared stories, and small bursts of Lila's laughter. Isaac stayed close without intruding, helping clear plates, tying stray balloons back to chairs, and even kneeling to fix the wheel on a doll stroller one of the children had brought. Every small action carried the same quiet care he had shown from the beginning. Later, when the guests had gone and the apartment was still again, Diane stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before them, its skyline glittering in the crisp night air. Isaac joined her, his jacket unbuttoned, the night breeze ruffling his hair. Lila appeared a moment later, climbing up onto the low bench between them. She looped her arms around both their waists, pulling them closer. "See," she said, with the simple certainty only a child could carry. "We fit." Diane smiled, her hand resting lightly on Isaac's arm. He looked down at Lila, then at Diane, and for a moment no one spoke. The lights of the city twinkled like distant stars, and the air was filled with a quiet sense of something mended. There, on that balcony, with their arms wrapped around each other, they stood as 3 people bound not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, and by the healing that comes when hearts are willing to open again. And so what began with a tired little girl on a set of stairs became a story of quiet bravery, second chances, and the kind of love that heals more than one heart. Diane found more than someone to stand beside her. She found a partner who had already been walking toward her life, without either of them realizing it. Isaac gained the family he never thought he would have again. And Lila, well, Lila got her wish. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more moments like this are out there, waiting to be told. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and join us for more tales that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit, the bonds we create, and the love that can change everything. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths and the most beautiful beginnings.